Okay, let's dive in. Today, we're really unpacking a pretty significant topic in India, the whole complex world of Waqf properties.
Right. And specifically, the recent efforts, the legislative push, to reform how they're managed.
Exactly. We're zoning in on what's been called the Waqf Amendment Bill, looking at proposals around 2024, maybe 2025, because, well, they seem to be tackling very similar reforms.
And our goal here really is to get a handle on what these changes are actually trying to do. What are the benefits proponents are highlighting?
And crucially, what are the big concerns, the criticisms being raised? Because there are definitely some significant ones.
It's a layered issue, for sure. Sits
Yeah.
right at that intersection of, law, religion, property rights. It's complicated.
Definitely. So maybe first base. What is Waqf, fundamentally?
Okay, so the sources basically define it as a permanent dedication. Someone takes property, could be land, could be a building, movable or immovable,
Right.
and dedicates it permanently for purposes that Muslim law sees as pious, religious, or charitable.
And that dedication makes these properties hugely important, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. They're not just like assets on a balance sheet. They have vital religious functions, social ones, economic ones for the Muslim community across India.
And this system, it has a long history in India. We're talking laws going way back.
Yeah, 1913, 1923, 1954,
Mm.
leading up to the main one currently in force, the WAC Act of 1995.
Which itself was amended significantly back in 2013.
Correct. And the whole thing is administered through this structure. You've got the Central WAC Council at the top, then state WAC boards.
And Waqf Tribunals to handle the disputes.
Exactly. And this new bill is looking to shake up that existing structure.
So what's the driving force? What's the main goal behind this new legislation, according to its supporters?
Well, the proponents frame it mostly as modernization. They want to, drag WAC administration into the 21st century.
Okay.
Boost transparency, that's a huge one. Make the management more professional, protect the actual assets from, say, encroachment or misuse. And generally, fix problems they see lingering from the 95 Act in that 2013 amendment.
Right. So efficiency, transparency, sounds good on paper. What specific problems are they saying this bill will actually solve? What advantages are they pointing to?
They argue it tackles several pretty deep-rooted, long-standing issues. A big one is the lack of transparency people often talk about in how WAC money and properties are managed.
Okay.
Tied to that is a problem of incomplete surveys, actually mapping out all the WAC land across India and getting the land records updated, the mutation process.
Which is basically getting the official government records to show who's actually responsible for the land.
Precisely. And when those records are messy and the management isn't clear.
Conflict, it leads to conflict.
Exactly. And the scale of that conflict is just, wow. The sources mention litigation over WAF properties has more than doubled.
Doubled?
Yeah, in about a decade. From around 10,000 cases in 2013 to over 21,600 now. That's a lot of tied-up assets, lost potential revenue, and just distress for everyone involved.
So the bill is seen as a way to cut through that red tape, reduce these endless court battles.
That's the hope, yes, to untangle that mess.
Now, there's this other point that seems really contentious, keeps popping up in the sources. This power Waqf boards apparently have.
Ah, yes. The power to declare a property as WAC, sometimes based just on their own inquiry, maybe without super solid proof. The force calls it an irrational power.
That sounds like a major flashpoint.
It absolutely has been. Proponents argue the bill is designed specifically to curb this, to streamline management, but, and this is key, while also protecting the property rights of others who might get caught up in these declarations unfairly.
And the examples given in the source material, they really hit home, don't they? Showing the real-world impact.
They do. I mean, we're talking disputes over private land, but also government property. The source highlights, as of late 2024, nearly 6,000 government properties.
6,000 government properties declared as WAF. How does that even happen?
Well, that's kind of the core issue proponents want this bill to fix. And it's not just government land. You have cases like that farmer in Tamil Nadu.
Oh, right. The entire village was claimed.
Yeah, his whole ancestral village, basically making his land impossible to sell. Or in Bihar, the Sunni Waqf board claiming a village, affecting 7 families.
Wow.
Then in Kerala, 600 Christian families fighting a claim over land they say they've held for generations. And Karnataka, big protests from farmers over 15,000 acres designated as WAF.
Those don't sound like one-offs. They sound like maybe systemic issues based on how properties get identified and claimed.
That's the argument.
So how does the bill propose to fix these kinds of conflicts, specifically the government property issue, for instance?
Okay, so a key provision proponents highlight is pretty direct.
Yeah.
Government property that's currently identified as WAF would just stop being recognized as WAF under the new law. Simple as that.
Yeah.
The local collector, the government official, would then be empowered to make the final call on who actually owns it. So it directly tackles those nearly 6,000 claims on government land.
Okay, moving beyond just property disputes, the source talks about a social impact too. Empowering Muslim women, legal heirs. What's the idea there?
Yes, this is framed as a really positive outcome. The thinking is, if you professionalize management and boost the revenue coming from WAC properties,
Right.
you free up resources for welfare programs, specifically targeting the economically weaker sections within the Muslim community.
Like what kinds of programs?
Things to improve the economic and social status of women, especially widows and divorced women, maybe through self-help groups, financial independence schemes, that sort of thing.
And transparency plays a role here too,
Absolutely. Digitizing WAC records is central. Proponents say this makes it way harder for funds or properties to be misused or illegally occupied.
which protects the money meant for welfare.
Exactly. And it also helps ensure things like inheritance rights are properly recorded and respected, especially for female heirs, in family WAFs. There's even a specific clause mentioned, Section 3A2,
Oh.
that apparently mandates securing women's inheritance rights before a property can even be dedicated as WAC in the first place.
Interesting. And they're keeping the requirement for women on the boards.
Yes, the source notes it retains the rule for having 2 Muslim women members on both the state WAC boards and the Central WAF Council.
So it sounds like the argument is better administration leads directly to more community upliftment.
That's the connection they're making, yeah.
Yeah.
Better management, more money flowing in, means expanded welfare, healthcare, education, housing, livelihood support for those who need it most.
And any changes to the actual administrative structure itself, the boards.
Yes, proponents point to reforms there too. Again, aiming for more transparency, better coordination between the WAC boards and local government authorities, like municipalities, and also making the boards themselves more inclusive. The bill apparently proposes mandating representation from different Muslim sects, not just Shia and Sunni, but also groups like Bora, Aga Khani, and backward classes.
And involving local government.
Right, including maybe 2 or more elected members from municipalities or panchayats on the state boards.
So putting it all together, the proponent's vision seems to be a system for managing these religious assets that's more secular, transparent, and accountable.
That's essentially how they frame it.
Right.
They see the role of the boards and the council shifting more towards being regulatory bodies, ensuring legal compliance, acting in the public interest tied to the Waqf's purpose, rather than purely representing specific sects.
Okay. That paints a pretty clear picture of the goals and the potential upsides, at least as seen by the bill's supporters. But as you said at the start, there's significant pushback. Let's get into that. What are the major worries from critics?
Right, and this is where the debate gets really fundamental. It touches on religious autonomy, the nature of Waqf under Muslim law itself, even constitutional rights.
Where's the main friction point regarding the administrative bodies, the boards, and the council?
Okay, a massive concern for critics is the proposed composition of these bodies. The current 1995 Act, broadly speaking, requires members to be mostly Muslim.
Right.
The proposed bill changes that. It mandates including non-Muslim members. Specifically, it says 2 members must be non-Muslims.
And critics see this as a problem. Why?
A huge problem from their perspective. They argue this opens the door, potentially, to non-Muslims forming a majority or having undue influence on bodies that are managing properties defined by Muslim law.
Ah, I see.
They argue this could violate Article 26 of the Constitution, the right of religious communities to manage their own religious affairs. And they often point out that endowment bodies for, say, Hindu or Sikh communities are usually made up entirely of members from those faiths.
Okay, what about the Waqf Tribunals, the ones handling all those thousands of disputes?
The key concern there is the proposal to remove the requirement for an expert in Muslim law to be part of the tribunal.
Removing the legal expert.
Yes. Critics say that expert is crucial, precisely because Waqf is rooted in and defined by Islamic legal principles. Without that expertise, they worry adjudication might misunderstand or misapply the specific nuances of Waqf law.
The source also mentions something about a new rule for who can create a Waqf.
That's another point critics raise. The bill apparently says only someone who has been practicing Islam for at least 5 years can declare a Waqf.
5 years. Why?
Well, critics question the rationale. They argue it creates this kind of arbitrary distinction between Muslims based on how long they've been practicing their faith. They suggest this could potentially clash with Article 14 of the Constitution, the right to equality.
And the appeals process from those tribunals is changing too.
It is. Under the 95 Act, tribunal decisions were generally final. You couldn't easily challenge them in regular civil courts. The new bill apparently scraps that finality.
So you can appeal now.
Yes. It allows direct appeals to the High Court within 90 days. Now, while that offers an appeal route, critics point out it fundamentally changes the established legal weight and finality of the tribunal's rulings.
And the source even flags some potential issues with the bill's drafting, like contradictions.
Yeah, seems like it. There's a pretty clear contradiction noted. The bill says you must have 2 non-Muslim members on the boards.
Right.
But it also apparently keeps an older rule that says a person can be disqualified from being a member if they're not Muslim. So those two things don't really line up.
That sounds awkward.
It does. And then there's the issue of waqf by user.
What's that?
That's where a property, maybe like an old burial ground or a community space, isn't formally dedicated, but becomes recognized as waqf simply because the community has used it for religious or charitable purposes for a very long time, for generations. The bill reportedly removes this concept. And the ambiguity critics worry about is whether this change is retrospective. If it is, what happens to properties that have been functioning as community waqf spaces for decades based on this principle? Could they lose their status?
Right, that could affect a lot of places. One last point from the critics' side, the CEO of the state Waqf board.
Yes, the chief executive officer.
Yeah.
The bill removes the requirement that this person must be Muslim.
And the concern is?
Critics argue this goes against the grain of how other religious endowments are often run, where administrators usually belong to that faith to ensure they understand its principles and purpose. They even point back to the Sankara Committee report from 2006, which actually said government officers with knowledge of Islamic law were needed to handle waqf matters efficiently. So removing the requirement seems counter to that past recommendation.
Okay, so if we step back and look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
You've got this push from proponents for transparency, efficiency, stopping misuse, all things that sound positive on the surface.
Exactly. Good governance goals.
But the critics are looking closely at how the bill proposes to achieve that.
Right. They're focused on the specific mechanisms. Who gets to govern these institutions? How will legal interpretations based on Muslim law be handled?
And they see potential changes that, even if aimed at efficiency, might dilute the religious nature of Waqf governance.
Or impinge on the community's constitutional right to manage its own religious affairs, as they see it. It really highlights that classic tension, doesn't it? Balancing secular governance ideas with the specific nature of religious endowments.
So this whole legislative effort, whether we're talking about the 2024 ideas or 2025 discussions, it's clearly a major attempt at reform. It's aiming right at transparency, efficiency, stopping the misuse of these valuable assets.
For sure. But at the same time, it forces us to grapple with these really fundamental questions. Who should run institutions that are based on religious law within a diverse secular country like India? How do you bring in modern governance, accountability, all that, while still respecting the unique character, the foundational laws of these religious institutions? It really shows that ongoing balancing act, protecting property, evolving how things are managed.
So maybe the thought to leave everyone with is, what does this whole debate tell us about the broader challenges? The challenge of governing religious endowments in a place like India.
Right. How do you ensure accountability, make things transparent, but do it in a way that respects the specific identity and the legal basis of these institutions? It really makes you think about where that line, that balance point actually is.